When we read environmental stories in the news or in long form media or anything like that, it's always quite negative. And part of the reason is because we're talking about stories after they've happened. So this dam has been built and it's destroying this area, or this water area has been polluted, or these communities are being poisoned to death or getting cancer because of all this industrial waste. It's this after story. And how do 1 million people lose their land and livelihoods? And I think the true environmental story, and where I'd like to see environmental storytelling continue to move in, is the process of how you get there. Because when I would go as a journalist and investigate these issues on the ground, when I heard about these issues, I would realize that local communities, local NGOs, everybody involved had an awareness of what was going to happen months to years in advance. The problem was that there was this disconnection at the very local level. If you're a rural Liberian farmer and you're seeing landscaping being done around you for a palm oil plantation that has no right to be there, how do you get that out? You don't have roads, or it takes 3 days or maybe even a week if the rains are in effect. And to get to the main capital, you don't have the money to do that. You don't have phone network, internet network in most of the country. And you don't know people. So in terms of disconnection, you don't have the contacts. You might have them at the local level, but certainly not at the kind of national level to raise awareness about these issues of the policymakers or the journalists or anything else. So you're disconnected in terms of your ability to influence what happens in your land. That can be a very powerless position. It's also from the other side, if you are a global policymaker or anybody that wants to change things on the ground, whether it's environmental issues, corruption issues, human rights abuses, how do you get to speak to that last mile? How do you have the ability to share all these incredible global databases that we have in the world at that local level so that people can do informed reporting and click into the global information system that we have? When we were making the Silas film, I realized very clearly that all of these issues are happening on the ground all the time. But as a journalist or as a filmmaker, I am not going to be there while it's happening. I can't be everywhere at once. I wasn't able to tell that story. What I could do, though, is empower all of those disconnected people that had a piece of the narrative to be a participant. I worked quite heavily with Silas, who was the voice and grounding point of this film, with his network of how he got information not only during the Liberian War and the resource wars that were happening during Charles Taylor's time, but also currently in the present day under the Nobel laureate and then President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, to understand what was happening on the ground. At that time, it was word of mouth, it was informants, it was taking pictures on a camera, and then somehow trying to bring them to the Capitol. And I thought, what about if we equip them with technology that can do the same thing, but create a georeference point and a timestamp so that when something is being taken in, it can be used as a piece of evidence in building a repository of data that they can use to then lobby for a change and improvement. On a filmmaker side, it was really about setting up a system that wouldn't just be extractive, yes, take all this photographic evidence for me, but would help them in their larger vision of what they wanted to change in their world. So we created TIMBY, This Is My Backyard, as part of the film with that entire group and set up the system for people to participate. So the story of Silas is really the story of all of these people across the country that were reporting on what was happening to their land and working with Silas, the main character, and his organization to contextualize that into what it meant at a both national and global level in terms of corruption and illegalities that were being done by big business working in extractive industries, usually foreign owned.
And not to completely ruin the storyline, but can you walk us through this citizen journalist movement that you empowered? Were there real world repercussions, and why did it work?
In terms of the storyline that you see in the film, we pieced out probably 3 or 4 different narratives from hundreds that they were collecting during that time, because at least in terms of a storyline, it makes more sense to see a beginning, middle, and end of something. So we chose the ones that worked, but we flagged over 60 illegal forestry concessions, which launched a presidential investigation, legal cases against high-ranking officials, exposed the president and her family's participation in it, exposed tens of millions of corrupt CSR funds from big oil companies that were participating in this, that were paying off government and paying off systems and not leading to change and development in the ways that were promised to people on the ground. That is 1% of what we uncovered. And what we could say in the film was based on legalities, triangulating evidence, and a whole bunch of other factors. Whereas we've seen almost everything that we uncovered play out in the years to come about corruption, accountability, and the role of the first family. We were able to only put a tiny fraction of it into a pretty big film, but it's just to prove that the importance of empowering people with their own data and enabling them to control, own, host, and manage data was so much more influential than what I as a journalist could do in terms of the storytelling. So massive changes from the film itself and the participation, but continual changes from these communities, from these NGOs, and their continued work to this day, almost 10 years later, pushing and collecting and building cases for impact.
Alrighty, friends, if you liked what you heard in that little snippet and you feel inspired, make sure to subscribe right here on YouTube and head over onto your favorite podcast player to look for the Impact Everywhere podcast to find more inspirational guests just like this every single week. My name is Benjamin Von Wong, and I hope you have a wonderful week. Stay positive because impact is everywhere.